up on the dais and present blind spots, dark sides, and hidden problems.
Hello, everybody, dear ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start with two little pre-marks. The first is I really feel honored to be here. I'm absolutely stunned by the organization, by the mass of people who came here, by the organization and everything. Thank you very, very much for inviting me and giving me the chance to be here. The second remark rather leads us to the topic. So far this morning we've been talking about, am I too slow? Too low? Oh, that is uncommon for me. That's so better? The second remark goes to the topic that we have in general. This morning there was a lot talk about restoring the river or rivers in Chennai, about reconstructing cities with their waterways in certain parts of India. And I think even though those projects sound like removing mountains, they still they have a certain scape. They can be sort of planned, they can be done. Even I don't want to deny that this is a lot of effort that needs to be taken in order to approach things like that. But whatever I'm going to say in the next 20 minutes or half an hour, which will be far more skeptic and will lead to far more skepticism, I'm not talking about reconstruction projects. However skeptical I might sound, I'm not questioning the ability and the possibility and the possible success of reconstructing rivers in Chennai and rescale the landscape that you're living in. My topic is beyond that. It's on sort of the global level. I'm talking about questions. How do we deal with the water problems that we have seen from a global perspective? So we are really on the highest level, so to speak, which does not mean that it doesn't break down to the local one, but my skepticism, to sum up my second remark, is founded in the view on water politics worldwide. So from this perspective, I want to talk about blind spots, dark sides, and hidden problems, and throw a critical view on water governance. And now we also have a small art piece, because we have a choreography between the presenter and me, and very well done. We go one step further. Yes, please. Yes, please. First of all, I want to talk about a possible, not the only one, but a possible structural perspective on water problems. And then, second, please, I will talk about the necessities and the problems of interventions into the complexity of water issues. And my third and last part will deal with governance, or a long way to go. So we start, water problems. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. And next, please. I asked myself, how do we, and for the last couple of years, I've asked myself quite often, how do we really address water problems? What is the standpoint that we take in order to look for solutions, or only to describe the problems? And what I'm doing right now is I want to share with you the experience for a moment, to just assume you were one of those 800 million people worldwide with no safe access to clean water. One could add, you might also want to assume you're one of the 2.5 billion people who don't have access to safe sanitation. And I must admit that I've been working on this topic for years and years and years until I found a quote in the Human Development Report of 2006. And they had a slum dweller, there was a quotation by a slum dweller, Maria Kibiani, who said, you know, we have no water, we have no toilets, everything goes into bags and buckets. Our children die from fatal diseases that they get, and I don't know. Of course, I had known 2.5 billion people have no access to clean sanitation. But reading these lines, I suddenly got another understanding. And of course, I'm not living in this reality. But it got me a little bit closer. So I think, just to imagine what it would mean to go 2 or 3, 4 kilometers to the next water well to get water and so on. It helps to sort of to capture the problems that we are dealing with. And just one more word, what really frightens me, 2.5 billion people with no access. And we still assume that this number is lower than its reality. That means 1/3 of mankind. And to a certain extent, it seems to me incredible. We are flying to the moon, we are talking about flying to the Mars, we do all sorts of things, but 1/3 of our human brothers and sisters don't have a restroom to go to. This is really something that we need to change. And so, okay, that's enough of that imagination. Second, next one, please, which is always associated with this. If you also would assume that there is every other minute a person in the world who are in danger to die of waterborne diseases, or next one, please, if you really started to think seriously about leaving your country, because the resources you have, the water resources you have, are neither sufficient for yourself nor for agriculture or industry. And we are talking about, in this last point, that by the next 20, 30 years, the number of people who will be strongly offended by this hard type of water vulnerability, as we call it, will increase to 20, 30, or 40% of the global population. Now, if you make this experience, and if you assume this for a second, that you were one of those, then I think one question sort of lies in the air, and next one, please. And that is a question, why? Why is this so? Or, to put it somewhat differently, what are causes for water vulnerability? And by water vulnerability, we mean the ratio of water that a person has, either on a personal level or on a country level or a regional level, and so on and so on. But if we look at all these problems, the next question naturally is, next one please, what type of problems cause the lack of water, and we stick with that, what type of problems do we have to deal with if we want to get rid or to deal with the problem? And next one, please. The list that I'm trying to show you now is maybe not complete, and this is not the aim of it. The main aim of the next 5 minutes is to get you familiar, make you familiar with the enormous complexity of issues which are intertwined, which in the last end cause that the little boy or you or me do not have access to water. To start with, ecological aspects. Of course, and this list, as all the other lists, is not complete, but an easy ecological or environmental reason for a lack of water could be a mismatch between regular water availability and human and ecological needs. There are two different basic types. One type is, how many people live in Chennai? 13 million? 10 is enough. You have 10 million people in one place, but the water, for example, comes down, or the rain comes down somewhere else. So a mismatch between where the water comes down and where the people live and where it's needed is a very common thing, which might cause water shortage. The second major type is water comes, but at the wrong time. You need it in the summer and you get it in the winter. And instead of doing you any good in the winter, it kills your harvest, or. But, of course, we are humans, we know what to do. In the case we have water, but we have it at the wrong time, we tend to collect it, and we've seen examples where this is done in a rather sustainable way. A less sustainable way is the big dams and the huge storage things, which cause new problems. Am I saying that we have a mismatch between regular water and the needs? I'm not saying that we have no skills to deal with that, but definitely this is one problem that we have to deal with. A second major one, and an increasing one, is we have water, but the quality is bad. A bad water quality is maybe at sometimes even worse than no water. Because first of all, you cannot use the water, like in many industrial uses, you do not need some kind of water, you need clean water. Of course, you also need clean water for agriculture and for household uses, but even in industry, it doesn't help you to have a completely poisoned river. So bad water quality is one of the many reasons why people have a lack of clean water for their household uses or even for other uses. If we talk about environmental aspects, this list is by no means complete. We also talk about interactions when we become more complicated, interactions between different interventions that we make into nature which have effects on the water household. Just to give you one example, we know that deforestation changes the water cycle. And deforestation, which changes the water cycle, does not necessarily mean that if you cut down a forest here, it will change the water household here. It could mean that deforestation in some distant part, somewhere else, has an effect on the hydrocycle 500,000 or 2,000 kilometers away. So environmental aspects are a huge issue, of course, in terms of problems caused. Second one, please, or next one, please. Social aspects. You can get clean water wherever you are on this earth. You can have sufficient clean water. You can have a Gulf court in dry parts. We flew over the Emirates, how do you say them? Emirates yesterday, and you see nothing but dust and sand, and then a Gulf place. So that means even though you have no water, if you have money, you also have water. So the lack of water has a very, very, very strong social side. And you can sum it up. You will have a problem with water if you're poor, if you're a child, or if you're female, and if you hit it really badly, you're a female poor child. We know that despite all the successes that have been made under the Millennium Development Goals, the progresses are, I quote, bypassing the poor. And I should add one thing, they're especially bypassing the poor in the rural landscapes. So actually, one thing should be added here. If you're a poor female child in the countryside, good night. So when we talk about dealing with water problems, we also need to talk about social aspects, and then we need to talk about social justice. Next one, please. The third type is technical challenges. You're suffering from water, from access to water because either infrastructure has not been installed at all, or because infrastructure is not maintained, or you have infrastructure in your city and it is maintained, but unfortunately you're too poor to pay for it. All this will mean that you have no access to clean water. I would think that ecological, social, and technical aspects, but you may correct me in the debate or later on, are the most sort of important types of immediate factors for water vulnerability. They immediately, if you're in a social situation, they immediately have an effect on your chances to have access to or not. And next one, please. They're accompanied and intertwined by at least 4 other dimensions that I want to talk briefly about. The economy. Well, the economy, of course, has an effect on our environment. It has an effect on our social life, and has an effect on our technical challenges. Just to put it very, very simple, if you're increasing industrialization, you will increase the amount of water you use. This is what we see in statistics, and this was just plausible. So an increase in environmental, economic performance will also include an increase in water use that you have. Even more so with agriculture, but anyway. The way you lead your economy will have either devastate more of your ecological surroundings, or if you do it a little bit more smarter, it might at least not destroy it completely. But in any case, the economic development has an effect on the ecological aspects. And of course, I do not need to line out that, also on the social life and the social structures. And in the end, also, of course, on the technical sides, if you have a good running economy, you might be able to afford a working technical infrastructure, and so on and so on. Yeah. We can talk about examples maybe later on, but I just want to give the big picture. Second, and next one, please. Demography will also have a severe effect on the question how much water is available and for whom. And beyond, I know that there's a big political fight about talking about the population growth and the effects of population growth on environmental resources. And my position is it must be possible to say that a future world population will use more resources without insinuating at the same time that therefore the world population should be shortened in some Chinese way or however. But we need to address the fact that the growth in world population is something that we have to consider. And if you look at the Millennium Development Goals, we can briefly say that all the success that has been made in the last 15 years sort of was eaten up by population growth. This is why we can talk about success on the one hand side. Yes, we have a larger amount of the world population who has access to safe water and to clean sanitation, has gained access since 1990, but the absolute figures is more or less unchanged. We have been talking about it was 1 million before, but 800,000 people with no access to water and 2.5 billion with no access to sanitation. And this is basically been unchanged since 1990. So demography does not only mean increase, but it also means the question, where do people move and how do they live there? Because, for example, if you have a slum, you have a big problem with technical infrastructure and sort of pipelines and so on. So demography is the second indirect factor for water vulnerability that I see. Next one, please. Short, this is just an abbreviation for a number of problems, is military. 10, 15 years ago, it was, well, in the beginning of 1919, Ismail Serageldin, who at that point was about to become the boss of the water forum, coined the word, we used to have war over oil. In the last centuries, we will have war over water in the future. Matter of factly, until a couple of years ago, we did not have wars over water. We had military conflicts and armed conflicts in which water was involved. Yes, we did have that, but we did not have war for water. It was not that one army was marching somewhere else in order to get the water of some other country. But if you want to have a look at that, there's a pretty good timeline and chronology at the Pacific Institute near San Francisco. I'll tell you later. If you search for the name Pacific Institute, Peter Gleich, you'll find this database. It's pretty nicely organized. And you see that water plays an even more important role in military conflicts in the last couple of years. Just a couple of days ago, it was said that 750,000 people in Aleppo did not have access to clean water because they were victims of another armed attack. And if you look at this and look into this, you find that poisoning of water, destroying of dams, or the destruction of dams, that the threat to lead water some other way or to redirect water obviously have become more and more an instrument of military threatening in the last couple of years. So the question, plus of course that people who live in armed, in military areas or in areas where we have fights also tend to leave the country and so on and so on. So the military side or the peace and war side to water questions, I think will be becoming rather more important than it used to be in the past. Next one, please, and that's the last one for this. Very, very important are institutions. By institutions, I mean you see that cultural, religious, and legal norms and practices. That means, just to give you an example, the question of how you organize the right to water. Like, let's talk about the United States. Do you have the right that everybody who settles at a river may take off as much river as he wants to? That's one possible legal institution, which is also usual. But that means if you have this right, you can take as much water out of the river that you're settling next to, as much as you need, will necessarily mean that if you're in a period of drought and you are a farmer and you need a lot of water, you will take off as much water as you can get, and your neighbor down the river will get nothing. So the legal right, and this is a big problem in certain parts of the United States, the right to take as much water as you need from the river that goes through your country is just one tiny little aspect of legal institutions and how they need to be, or how they can be organized, and how they have an effect on the question whether you have an access to or not. In the last couple of years, we have seen this big fight to get the right to water, the human right to water as a part of the Human Rights Charter, and you know that this has been successful. But the next step in this period will be to find out which kind of legal norms to have to be installed in order to really secure this right and make it real. Yeah? Like it's nice to say everybody has a right. Every human being has a right to have access to clean water. Okay, but if you combine that, for example, with a legal institution that if you cannot pay for the water that's on your bill, they will take off the water from your household, which might also be a legal institution. Then you're deprived of your right for water on the basis of legal means. So the whole question also, and we have a big tradition, a big heritage in our different religious beliefs in all world religions. Water plays a very important role, and very often, or mostly, it is associated with the idea you are not allowed to deny somebody who needs water the access to it. And that also means if somebody is thirsty, you have to give him water. So maybe the religious institutions that we have, the religious norms, might lead us one way to go in the future. But no matter whether it's positive or negative, I state at this point that institutions play an important role. Next one, please, for the question of access or not access. So my little list, or my little table, is one attempt, and please correct me or add to it at some later point, is an attempt to map the aspects that we need to have in mind when we want to organize clean water for everybody. Next one, please. So I'm coming to my second point, interventions into complexity. And next one, please. Now, if you agree for a moment that even though this table might be enlarged and it maybe is too little, not complicated enough, and things are more have to be more differentiated, nevertheless, the main point I want to make is the following. Next one, please. That if this gives us at least a rough picture of the elements and the dimensions which are important in order to deal with the water crisis, we need a whole bunch of abilities and skills and knowledges to deal with this problem. And the first one, and this is now, this is a number, this is not a priority list, it's just the things in the order that they came to my mind. One thing, of course, and this will be clear, you need technical skills. If you don't know how to run a well, you don't start it. If you don't know how to maintain your infrastructure, it's not worth putting it up. So definitely you need a whole bunch of technical skills. Next one, please. Of course, you also, and that's another branch of science, you need data. You need all sorts of data. Just to give you one example, on social, ecological, economic aspects, and so on, you want to intervene into something and you need data. My university is in the eastern part of Germany, and the city of Halle had until the 90s when the, how do you say that in English, the Wende? I mean, the reunification, yeah, that's the most sophisticated. When the reunification came, it had about, let me think, I think 300,000 people, not so much. But the whole technical infrastructure water systems, canals, the washing of canals and everything was organized for 300,000 people. Reunification meant, especially in this area, caused a lot of unemployment and caused a lot of migration, international migration. So by now, the population of Halle is around 100 something, 2030. That of course means an German water system, and we're really proud of that, works in a way that you really just go to the tap and you drink the water from there. It's in all places in Germany you can drink the water from the tap, and 100% of the people more or less have water in their homes. So one reason why that is the case is that the canals are washed out all the time. You have to have a certain amount of throughput through the canal, because otherwise the flowing speed is too low and you get bacteria and also. So if you sort of cut down the amount of water that you use, it lowers the water in your canals, and bacteria and so on can walk in and sort of poison the water in the taps. So that's just and by the way, what the waterworks are doing, they are washing the canals, that one thing. And then, just to give you one more example about legal institutions, another big problem is because people, we have a certain pricing system, maybe we can talk about that later, and this pricing system creates an incentive to use as little water as you can, which is absurd because many of the costs are produced by the fact that you have to maintain the basic infrastructure. So 80% of the costs are produced by the fact that you have to have the technical infrastructure and so on. 20% of the costs are sort of produced by the water that the people use. But in what we pay, it's just the other way around. People pay 20% of their water bills is for the infrastructure, and 80% of what they pay is for the water they use. So now, technical, legal infrastructures, what people find a strong incentive to use as little water as possible in order to lower their water bills, which of course works up to a certain point when the waterworks realize that people are not using enough water to cover their costs, and will of course increase the water prices again, and will also necessarily need to increase the prices that people pay for the amounts of water. And then people are very unhappy and think they're paying far too much. Yeah? So it's just two tiny things of the legal institutions make a big difference, one, and B, what I'm actually talking about here, we need data, because if we don't have them, we don't know what to do. Next one, please. Of course, we need to know that the military side, we need to know a lot about peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace building. No comment on that. Next one, please. Social justice. I mean, that's obvious. If we agree, and the figures tell us that this is unfortunately the case, poor are bypassed, and women and children are worst off in cases where water is low. We need to talk about social justice. And not only in the sense of moral ideas that we have, how things could get better, but in the sense of institutions and programs, social welfare programs, or whatever, education programs, in order to really ensure that the differences decline between the different the people in the different strata. Next one, please. We also need, thank you, by the way, this is really working great. The next one, of course, we need to talk about financial means. Yeah? And not only once, but also in order to keep up an infrastructure. I just told you about the example in Germany. you need to ensure that there is a certain flow of monetary refunding. Yeah? It doesn't help to have a whole bunch of money to start with, but you also you have to repair your infrastructure, so you also need to organize a certain flow in order to keep it up. Next one, please. And that is a little bit of an, comes back to the question of skills. Yes, we need skills, 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 and skills. And that is, we need education. We need to know about geology, we need to know about environmental connections, we need to know about water, we need to know about animals in the water, aquatic surroundings, and so on and so on. So education is one of the top priorities when it comes to deal with the water crisis. Next one, please. And this list could be extended. Just to give you a preview, when we talk about, in my workshop, I think tomorrow, when we talk about the knowledge map, I will come back to that, or we will come back to that, and ask ourselves, what kind of knowledges, what types of knowledge do we need to know, do we have to have when we want to deal with the water crisis. Next one, please. But not denying that all of these things are very, very important. I would like to highlight two things which I think, which are, I would not say most important, but which sort of fall in the subject of my discipline, and which I find have been neglected in the last 20, 30 years, where we wanted to improve water services. The one is the knowledge about effective and just regulations. What I mean by that is, I told you the example about the German water pricing system, which creates the wrong incentive, it creates the incentive to save water, but I must tell you, basically in many parts of Germany, and especially the part where I'm coming from, saving water is just not the right strategy, at least not within sensible limits and in the household dimension. People save water because they want to save the money, but the waterworks have to go and flush their canals with clean drinking water instead, yeah? Because they just don't have the sufficient throughput of water in the canals. And so, to put it another way, if I call this a tiny, tiny, tiny little part of the regulation, namely the regulation, your water bill consists out of, it's more complicated, but consists, let's keep it simple, out of two parts. One part is for the construction and one part is for what you use. This might lead into the completely wrong direction. The water rights. But in general, I think we really, we see the effects of wrong regulations often afterwards, but there's little knowledge, and I'm talking about international political science and political action, about how things will work out once they're implemented. Next one, please. And this is actually just sort of the same topic, a little bit more complicated. Oh, thank you very much. Water is always good. Thank you. Thank you. If there's some truth to what I said before, that we are talking about a highly complex and intertwined fabric, I call that a fabric, of economic, environmental, and social aspects which go together. We need to gain more knowledge about how we intervene into those fabrics. And not somehow, but how we intervene legitimately, effectively, and sustainably. Just to come back to this example of deforestation, it's good that we know that deforestation has an effect on water cycles or hydrocycles somewhere else. But the fact that we know that does not mean that we have any political idea about how we want to intervene into this connection. The fact that we know that the female child, the female poor, rural, are the worst ones off, does not mean that we have any good idea about how we intervene into this surrounding in order to change this. So we know a lot of things. We have a lot of, and this goes to the technicians and the hydrologists and the natural scientists. We have a lot of knowledge about natural phenomena, and we have data about all sorts of things, rain probability and water availability and so on and so on. All this knowledge, I'd say, is useless, almost useless, until we come to the point where we know what to do with it and how to intervene. It doesn't help us to know that the climate change is taking place. We have to know what to do about it. And there, I think human fantasy is underdeveloped. It's been one basic mechanism that has been used in the last 10, 15 years. And that is more or less monetary incentives. We think that if we pay less, we'll use less of so-and-so. We think that we can deal, ecosystem services was one of the topics, I don't know, did you talk about it? Somebody talked about it this morning. We think that when we pay our neighbors in order to give us so-and-so, yes, money, then things will happen. Yes, money may play a role, but we are far too stupid and too biased by projecting the human being as a rational maximizer of his own profit. And this is the sort of the idealized person that most of the political control mechanisms want to address. Maybe we can come back to that later on, but just to prove, I'll be done in a, yeah, to prove that I'm right, the fact that you are here has got nothing, and absolutely nothing, to do with the idea that you're looking for your personal profit, that you're just running after money, that you're a human being that just tries to avoid punishment, and so on and so on. All these ideas which are dominant in our ideas about regulation. Next one, please. I'm coming to the end, and next one, please. So, governance, what's the problem? Next one, please. And you can just run that down. So sort of keep on going without me intervening. Whoops. Oh yeah. When we talk about governance, we basically talk about 4 different types. The one is we have a definition. Now you know what? This is going to take me a second, which I don't have. I think maybe I just cut off here. And we do that at some other point or at some other point. I think that's maybe enough for the moment. And I'll talk about blind spots, hidden spaces, and stuff like that, maybe at some other point. Thank you very much.